Hi folks, I touched on this topic in a reasonable amount of detail in the weekly slash monthly overview that I did a few days ago. And truth to tell, when it comes to the month of February, in terms of aspects and transits to talk about, there isn't necessarily a whole lot. Every month is different. And I would strongly recommend, if you have not seen my weekly, monthly overview, and I'm saying weekly, monthly because you'll see in the topic description that it is a weekly and a monthly overview, and you'll see what happened as I was doing the video. I would strongly encourage you to take a look at it. It's not like I haven't done monthly overviews before, which have a fair amount of information about a fair amount of what's going on. So I will admit it's a little bit, is it a weekly overview? Is it a monthly overview? But again, it's one of these things where in the beginning of this year, when I started to do videos, I realized that you really can't talk about the first 4 months of this year, almost the first 5 months of this year, unless you look at it as kind of one big chunk of time. And similarly, as I was doing the weekly overview for the first week of February, I realized that you can't really talk about the aspects that are coming up in the first week of February without kind of taking all of February into consideration. So I would strongly recommend you take a look at that. One of the things that I talked about, and if you feel like, oh wow, there's information about so many transits, you don't have to watch the whole thing and digest it in one bit. You can watch a certain amount and come back to it, as you need to. There are various ways in which you can access or choose to see this information by playing it in its entirety, or hitting the pause button when you need to, or coming back to it if you need to. On February the 9th, the Sun conjuncts Mercury in Aquarius. And as I said, some of the information I'm going to share this is going to feel repetitive if you've seen that. But I did want to just take a pause and talk about the Sun-Mercury cazimi in the light of the Mercury cycle in Sagittarius. Again, information on this is also in that weekly, monthly overview, so please feel free to take a look at that amongst other things. But the bottom line is this. When it comes to Venus and Mercury, from our perspective, from where we are on Earth, if this is the Sun, both Venus and Mercury have a tendency, well, not a tendency, they do this. They go direct ahead of the Sun, they go retrograde, they meet up with the Sun, go direct, come up, meet up with the Sun, go retrograde, meet up with they hover around the Sun from our perspective. Now Venus clearly has a larger orb, whereas Mercury is much closer to the Sun at any given time. Mercury goes retrograde 3 to 4 times a year, and Venus typically goes retrograde once every couple of years or so. It's not quite that. It's like once every 18 months or something like that. It's not quite 2 years the way it is with Mars. But irrespective, please forgive me if I've given you, complete sort of technically inaccurate information right there with regard to the frequency of Venus retrogrades. But the bottom line is, from our perspective, Venus and Mercury are always traveling with the Sun, and they go around the chart traveling with the Sun, unlike Mars and Jupiter and Saturn that just go around the chart from our perspective. And they have their retrograde moments, but they are not hovering around the Sun. They're not with the Sun the entire time. So every time a retrograde Mercury conjuncts the Sun, it is said to start a Mercury cycle in the sign in which that conjunction occurs. Now, the Mercury-Sun conjunction, cazimi, as it is referred to, that is occurring on February the 9th, is not a retrograde Mercury conjuncting the Sun. Mercury is direct and traveling fast, moving quickly at this point in time, and conjuncts the Sun. So it's the cycle started on December. The cycle started on December the 5th, when a retrograde Mercury conjuncted the Sun in Sagittarius. And there are 4 cycles, 4 parts to the cycle. Mercury retrograde to when it goes direct, which was on December the 15th. December 15th to February 9th, Mercury direct but behind the Sun, phase 2. February 9th to March 15th, Mercury ahead of the Sun, phase 3. March 15th, Mercury goes retrograde and meets up with the Sun on March the 24th in Aries. And on March the 24th, the Mercury cycle in Aries begins. The way I experience a Mercury cycle is the reason why I talk about it now consistently is that I experience it in a pretty clear and definitive manner. You guys know that I've said this before, that I remain a kind of a skeptical until I really feel like I'm seeing enough data feedback from my perspective. And yes, I will admit my data is not being done in some sort of lab under strict scientific methods, but I'm not just going off of what I have read, or even what I have read consistently, or as far as the astrology, or I need to really be testing things. That's part of my own enjoyment of what it is I do and the kind of wonder I feel about it. I find that a Mercury cycle is like a steady drumbeat. And it's not a loud drumbeat, but it's a steady drumbeat that occurs in the background as everything else is going on in a cycle. I know which of my houses is occupied by the sign of Sagittarius. I use the whole sign system, WHOLE. So the sign of Sagittarius sits in one house. I know which house that is. I know where the Mercury cycle began. And if you were to say, Abhi, going back to December the 5th, and especially December 15th to February the 9th, I could tell you that as a sort of steady drumbeat, mercurial activities, communication, and remember, practically every action. I mean, there are certainly, I have no doubt, professions where Mercury does not play. If you were a blacksmith, or if you were a sculptor, but so much of what we do from a personal and business perspective is now run by Mercury. If you're a sculptor, the bulk of the activity you're doing may not be Mercury related, especially if you're doing things by hand. And even if you're soldering things, or welding things, or carving things. But being in touch with gallery owners and charging people, and how you collect money. So much occurs over email and transactions and Venmo and PayPal, and and there's certain professions for a lot of professions, Mercury, our professional lives are conducted over Mercury. Yes, I'm an astrologer, but I am using YouTube. I am dependent on my Wi-Fi. I am recording this on an iPhone. My readings are done over the phone. My, blah, blah, blah. I collect my payments using it. So Mercury is a huge, and Mercury, there's an internal processing, because it's about our minds, our minds. I'm not going to use the word brains. Our minds, wherever the mind sits, we seem to think that it sits in the brain, and there's no question that a certain amount of mental processing occurs there. But it's kind of a mysterious. I quite like the idea of attributing things to Mercury with regard to how it is that we process in language and make sense of what is going on around us from a 3D perspective. I find that things, that they're going to come in more of an intuitive or higher mind way, that may well be Jupiter operating, or it may well be Uranus operating. Very often I think it is Uranus operating, but irrespective. So there's an internal making sense of things. What is the word I'm looking for? Finding coherence, articulating things, communicating them to ourselves. I like the word articulating because we could be articulating things to ourselves, or we could be articulating things to others. I, of course, often say communications, transactions. And there's an external component to this as well. There's an element of being in action related to the Sagittarius part of the chart, that while it may not be front and center with everything that is going on, and that has been going on since December, with regard to the emphasis of the planetary action that's building in the Pisces part of the chart, and where the eclipses have been taking place, and where Jupiter is, and where Saturn is. But since December, for me, it's a steady, growing, series of actions and transactions. As it always happens when I'm doing this video, it's okay. My cat is using the litter box, so you can hear him sort of, he's used the litter box and now he's putting the litter over whatever he's done, and he's kind of pawing and cleaning. He has his own process. And one of the nice things about a Mercury cycle and this drumbeat is, yes, Valentine, I know, thank you. He also lets me know, which is very sweet. And one of the things that I like about Mercury cycles is that because it is somehow not front and center, occupying a lot of emotional energy, or energy in terms of prioritization in general, but it's stuff that we're just taking care of, and stuff that's occurring through us moving around, commuting, transacting, communicating, showing up, as I said, a steady drumbeat in the background, is that it has a tendency during a Mercury cycle to more easily bear fruit, because it has not become this thing that we are watching or monitoring or focusing on. The sun is coming out, so sorry about that, but again. Sorry. As you guys know, I'm always amused by, and you guys are always amused by, how it is that when I start to do readings, all of a sudden Glendale becomes the noisiest neighborhood in the whole universe. So the Mercury cycle started up on December the 5th, goes until March 24th in the sign of Sagittarius. One of the things you could ask yourself, and to see if what I just said resonates, is if you know where the sign of Sagittarius sits in your chart, has there been some growth in activity, a focus, a renewed focus? It's a little bit like taking a plant that's been in the dark and putting it out in the sun. And phase one is still Mercury's retrograde, so the car is still being pulled back. Some astrologers feel like the phase one of 4 in a Mercury cycle, December 5th to December 15th, is a little bit like goal setting or requirements gathering in a project. And then on December the 15th, when Mercury went direct, it's like we release the car and it is moving forward. And December 15th to February 9th is the most unapologetically yang part of this cycle, insofar as we are simply taking action. And very often we're not conscious of this process. We may not be conscious of a Mercury cycle. As I said, it's not where our mind is going constantly. Oh, where's my Mercury cycle? I should prioritize that. Our priorities are often occurring in different places. And it's very interesting that the next Mercury cycle starts on March the 24th in Aries, and we have an eclipse on March the 29th. Sometimes when something like that happens, that a Mercury cycle is there to help assist with a larger astrological event. And that will likely be the case as we head towards the March 29th eclipse. After the second phase is over and we go into the third phase, February the 9th to March the 15th, we are... There are different ways that different people describe it. I can only describe it as we've taken the plant, we've put it out in the sun, and now we can see blooms and buds start to appear, or we see that that has led to a certain amount of growth, a certain kind of growth and certain potential. Seeds have been planted. The biggest thing I want to convey is it's not as if the activities that you were doing in phase 2 disappear. You may still continue to do a certain amount of seed planting in phase 3, but there are elements of pruning, growing, taking stock of what has been built by February 9th, taking stock of the seeds that have been planted by February the 9th. And from February 9th to March the 15th, there may be an element of nurturing, tending, correcting, being in conversation about what was already done in phase 2, continuing to take similar actions to what were taken in phase 2. It's a bit more reflective. It's a little bit like requirements were gathered December 5th to December 15th. December 15th to February the 9th, we were building something. Planting seeds. We were working on something. We were putting a certain plant out into the light related to the Sagittarius part of our chart. We were back in action, back in circulation is a better word from a Mercury perspective. We could be circulating internally, articulating things to ourselves. We could be circulating externally through communication and learning, and we could be circulating literally with regard, no, well, not literally, but with regard to what it means with regard to transportation and communication, commuting and being out and about, taking care of matters. It could have a communication element, it could have a vocal element, it could have a musical element, it could have a mercurial element, writing, learning, teaching, social media, communicating, putting ourselves out there, interviewing, selling. And then in this phase 3, starting February the 9th, it's like whatever we built, if we built a prototype, or if we built, this will make more sense to people who worked in technology, an alpha version or a beta version of something, then in phase 3, we are testing it, prototyping it, seeing what things look like, and seeing how things need to be modified while we're still growing and building it. So it's like by February the 9th, I launch a version of my website. And between February the 9th and March the 15th, I keep working on it, but I also tinker with it and make adjustments to it and capitalize on it and start to use it and start to grow it. I'm basically, it's not putting the finishing touches as much as it is refining it, being in conversation about it, being in communication around it, pruning it, nurturing it, managing it, based on what was being built during phase 2. And phase 4, when Mercury goes retrograde on March the 15th to when Mercury is going to conjunct the Sun again, retrograde on March the 24th, is putting the finishing touches on it. Typically, one of the things that I suggest is, because people will often say, well, we shouldn't really be that much in action when Mercury is retrograde, or we shouldn't really be taking steps. And I will often say, when Mercury is retrograde, by all means, take steps and actions to finish up what you need to related to the last Mercury cycle that was going on. When I had a Mercury cycle in Capricorn, it was when Mercury was retrograde getting ready to conjunct the Sun that I finally monetized my channel. Or when I, so it's like, oh, I had that moment of, shall I really launch this? And it's just like, Avi, you've been launching this for the past few months. You're just putting finishing touches on something. Put the finishing touches on it and be done with that aspect of the Mercury cycle before the next Mercury cycle begins. Now, in the weekly monthly overview, I hadn't talked about this idea of it being kind of a constant drumbeat, not necessarily loud, but persistent, building something. Did not talk about the fact that I find that the Mercury cycles can often be one of the most productive elements of what is going on at any given time in our lives, because it doesn't take that kind of intense emotional focus that is caused by the parts of our chart that might be currently bringing us a certain amount of anxiety, or maybe really invested in from a hope perspective, like the Pisces part of the chart, or the Aries part of the chart, or the Taurus part of the chart, or the Gemini part of the chart, or right now the Aquarius part of the chart. The Sagittarius part of the chart had its activity in December, and we were kind of moved on from it. The most notable thing that happened in December is that as planets and Mercury was retrograde, they opposed Jupiter in Gemini. And the thing that I have mentioned with regard to the Conzimi on December the 9th, on February the 9th, coming up in that weekly monthly overview, but I will repeat here just in case you are just looking for information on the Mercury cycle and the Cazimi, is that where the Sun and Mercury conjunct, the house where they conjunct, may have some sort of a correlation or conversation related to where it is that the Mercury cycle started. So the Mercury cycle is about the Sagittarius part of the chart, but based on where we are at right now, and the planets, as they were going over the Sagittarius part of the chart, were opposing Jupiter. They needed to do what they needed to do in the Sag part of the chart to serve Jupiter's ability to end and therefore begin a 12, 13-year cycle in Gemini. Now, as the planets have moved into Aquarius, and we had a new moon in Aquarius recently on January the 29th, and that new moon trined Jupiter as opposed to opposed it. And it could be that some element, that this meeting of a direct Mercury and the Sun in Aquarius marks some sort of phase or action or activity that at present may be hidden to us, but marks an important development in that Mercury cycle. Something related to that Mercury cycle has a milestone in the Aquarius part of the chart that may feel a little bit hidden or behind the scenes, for the simple reason that when Mercury is close to the Sun, external communications may not be quite so visible. We have a Mercury that is dark. We have a Mercury that is burnt by the Sun. We have a Mercury that is not visible. We have a Mercury that is, in a sense, if you like, baptizing itself, cleansing itself. Part of the reason why I think the way I think of Venus and Mercury doing that thing with the Sun is, I feel like they take on a life of their own, and they take on so much of our egoic self that they need to be in communication with our solar self that is directly much more connected to source. We need to bring our communications, our mental processing, our transactions into sync with our higher self, just as we need to bring the relationships we're pursuing, how we are managing our resources, with what it is that we value. We need to touch base with the Sun from a Mercury and a Venus perspective often enough, and particularly from a Mercury perspective, so that Mercury does not become overly mercurial, overly worked up, overly it doesn't start to malfunction. And one of the things I always say about a Mercury retrograde is the biggest thing that it does is say, all right, I've been moving so fast that we're starting to go into assumption land and fantasy land about what is going to happen and what is going to work out and what's going to, you're starting to get to a place where you think you can sort of outsmart the universe into predicting what's going to happen next. And Mercury retrograde is like, all that effort was well worth it, but let me give you a sense of what is actually real. Let us come back to the realm of what is actually occurring and facts, and let me start to translate some of the things that you may have gotten intuitively that you're ignoring into what is fact-based. And let's Mercury and the Sun get back in touch with each other so that the Sun can inform Mercury or give Mercury the agenda of what needs to happen next and what needs to be built next. And when the Sun and Mercury conjunct, I often think of them as meeting up. Mercury was sent by the Sun, the last Mercury-Sun conjunction, given his set of marching orders, and he has been marching. And now, for some reason, it's like the next phase of it, and they need to meet up again and say, okay, based on everything that's done. So there may be a certain reflecting on these activities related to the Sagittarius part of the chart that have been going on since December the 15th, and growing and seed planting. And there may be a sense of, all right, I have built my version of this product or this website or whatever it is, and now we're going to launch it. And there might be, for the past few days, for the next 7 or 8 days, a kind of an assessing of what are the risks, and if something were to start to move forward, what would I go for, and what am I concerned about? And Mercury may need to reset or reassess his compass as he starts to move ahead of the Sun. And the communication starts to become more overt. And we start to go into a place of pruning, harvesting, growing, etc. As I've said before, and as I said in the weekly monthly overview, Mercury conjuncting the Sun can lead to a kind of a Mercury retrograde energy. Very often, it leads to a kind of Two of Swords energy of, should I do this? Should I send this communication? Should we move forward this way? All of a sudden, it isn't quite so easy or quite so clear. Decision-making may feel a little bit more complicated or a little bit more hangman energy. You know, I'm talking about tarot cards here for a second. I'm seeing my Two of Swords is being used somewhere else, and my hangman is being used somewhere else, I think. Never mind. But it has that kind of, all of a sudden, it's like, no, I'm not quite ready to hit that email yet. I'm not quite ready to be in there's kind of a feeling of, I need to spend a few days kind of recentering and getting clear about things. Now, it could be that there are certain communications that occur over the next week that are searching for answers, that are looking for answers, that are looking for clarity, and all of that, of course, might make sense. But there's also, it could have that, Mercury is close to the Sun, and when Mercury was a little bit more visible or not quite completely being taken over by the solar energy, it's part of that solar energy that is saying, let's reconnect, let's download, let me inform you, Mercury, and then you can start communicating and transacting based on that. So don't be surprised if over the next week or so, you find yourself in a place where all of a sudden it's not quite where like the compass is spinning a little bit, where it just feels like my mercurial self, mental processing, verbal processing, writing, communicating, transacting, is a little bit held back because it's in a conference room with the Sun, because where things are happening on a much more internal solar level. There's a kind of a touch base or conversation happening there. Now, as I've said, Mercury retrograde things like delays and miscommunication and all that kind of stuff can also occur during this time in a smaller sense. The other thing, based on where we're at right now, which is so striking and interesting, is that 6 days from now, we have the Leo full moon. And we've got the full moon in Leo, and we've got the Sun and Mercury very close together in Aquarius. So the full moon opposes the Sun and a Mercury that is moving forward to the Sun, but is still combust. So it's possible that as you get to that full moon, and of course, all these planets are squaring Uranus in Taurus. So some part of this Cazimi energy could lead to a kind of a leonine response. And I'm going to do a separate video on the Leon full moon. Some sort of a full moon response. It could mean visibility, but it could also mean expression. It could mean an intuitive or emotional reaction to the fact that something presents itself or something comes up and we are simply have not been in a place where we've been able to manage that situation through communication, or something comes up that puts us in a place where we have to apply the direction that we are committing to with this Sun-Mercury conjunction to something external. So let's say that you have decided that you're going to move forward, that there are certain seeds that have been planted since December the 15th. And as you get to February the 12th or so, you've become clear on what your priorities are or how you're going to approach some things. And then something comes up externally that makes you make that choice between, oh, no, 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 we're not doing this. We're going to approach it this way. Or this is where I'm going to draw the line. Or this is where I'm going to draw the boundary. Or, oh crap, this has come up while I have not been in a place where I could use communication to manage it. But now I'm going to have to use a full moon type of reaction to address it or manage it. And the Cazimi is related to the Mercury cycle in Sagittarius, so it could be a next step. What needs to happen in the Aquarius part of the chart to help this cycle that began in the Sagittarius part of the chart move forward? Next, what is the next phase? How does it involve the Aquarius part of the chart? How does it involve the Aquarius part of the chart trining Jupiter and Gemini? And how does whatever action need to be taken around the full moon allow you to move forward in the direction that is right for you in the Taurus part of the chart? Because the full moon and the Sun and Mercury are squaring Uranus and Taurus. But ultimately, be clear that from a communication process, Mercury is not quite at his articulate best right now, because there's a recognition that there's certain things that need to get clear on. An old set of things that we accrue as we are moving fast needs to be burned off, and Mercury needs to be, for lack of a better way of putting it, born again through his conversation, interaction with the Sun. Kind of an old set of accretions need to be burned off by the rays of the Sun, and a kind of a purification of intent, next steps, alignment based on whatever has been grown in the Sagittarius part of the chart and what the next steps are related to the Aquarius part of the chart and how that aligns with taking action that will help Jupiter create his ending and new beginning, and how these actions need to be taken to help us move forward in the right way, in the way that is individual to us and right for us in the Taurus part of the chart. All those conversations are occurring now. So it's hard to be external with communication, although there may be a need as you head towards the full moon on the 12th to be external on some situation that just gets a kind of an emotional response or reaction. Something comes through that challenges this direction. Something comes through, as I said, where an external communication may occur that you feel needs a kind of a reaction based on this alignment that you are getting clear on, etc., etc., etc. to bring this video content down to something a little bit more bite-sized, I would reflect on what has been growing, what the Mercury cycle in Sagittarius, and the Sagittarius part of the chart, and the house occupied by Sagittarius in your chart, might mean to you with regard to something that has been growing, or a drumbeat of action and activity that has been occurring, I hesitate to say in the background, but while everything else has been going on. And if it resonates, great. If it doesn't resonate, I mean, yeah. It resonates for me, and it resonates in the work that I'm doing with regard to readings and what I'm seeing. But that's point number one. Point number two, I would think about the Aquarius part of our chart. I would think about the new moon that occurred in Aquarius on January the 29th. I'll post a link to that new moon video at the end of this video. And I would think about what this Sun-Mercury conjunction, what is it that Mercury needs to, what are you deciding? How are you realigning in the Aquarius part of the chart so that you can bring that part of the chart into alignment with what you value? There we have it. And some of that may be related to this activity, related to the Sagittarius part of the chart. Some of it may just be wider, related to the Aquarius part of the chart. And that's where I'm going to leave things. On the 14th, Mercury moves into Pisces, followed by the Sun on the 18th. And the Pisces part of the chart now will start to see greater communication as we get to that. But there'll be more videos on that. I just wanted to, I just felt inspired to do this video. So hopefully some of you at least will connect to it or enjoy it, you know, if for nothing else than for entertainment purposes, just to kind of see if any of this resonates and what that might mean to you. And we'll keep taking it from there. All right, that's it. If you are interested in getting a reading from me, I have a couple of different options. There's a fuller reading for 60 to 75 minutes. There's a single topic reading also for about 30 to 40 minutes. You can email me using the email address in the description box below, and I can send you information about rates. Subscribe to my YouTube channel if you haven't already. When you subscribe, it gives you a wiggly bell option on top. There's a bell icon. Click on the wiggly bell and you'll be notified when I post my videos. There's a thanks button underneath this video. You can use that to contribute to the channel. If you find this kind of content useful or interesting, you're welcome to tell other people about it as well, and spread the word. You can also, and this is a free way to contribute to the channel, you can like the video or comment on it. Likes and comments give the video greater circulation on YouTube. Okay, I will leave it at that. As I said, if you want a sense of the energies relative to both this week but also February, check out the last video I did, which was the monthly overview. And I'm realizing it may also be helpful, if you haven't, to take a look at the Aquarius new moon video, if that is of interest to you, because it could correlate to this. Again, you know, yeah, I'll leave it at that. Thanks. Take care.